A man is never truly tested when he wins. He is tested when he's broken. And I tell you this, the market will break you, strip you bare, and force you to face yourself. A man does not prove himself when the market runs in his favor. Anyone can grin at the sight of a rising account. Anyone can strut when the tape prints profits. The true test comes when ruin stares you in the face, when the ticker bleeds against you, and every instinct screams to hold on just a little longer, to pray for a turn that never comes. That's the moment when the market strips you bare. I've sat through those hours, watching the numbers drip red, the pitiless march of loss as steady as a clock. It feels like a storm battering the hull of a ship, tearing away pride, shaking every ounce of resolve. Most men sink right there, clinging to hope as if it were a lifeboat, when in truth it is an anchor pulling them under. I remember a trade that looked perfect on the surface. The pattern was clean, the move was sharp, and the street was buzzing with conviction. I stepped in, built my line, and for a time it moved in my favor. Then, quiet as a thief, the tone shifted. The tape hesitated, volume dried, and soon the price edged back. It wasn't violent, not at first, just a steady drift. That's the most dangerous kind of loss. The slow leak that tempts you to stay, whispers that the tide will turn if you just give it one more day, one more hour, one more tick. I sat there watching, knowing deep down it was wrong, but pride pressed me to wait. And in that hesitation, the leak became a flood. That's the battlefield where a man is truly tested. Not when the crowd cheers him on, but when he sits alone, staring at the truth he doesn't want to see. The market doesn't care for prayers or excuses. It doesn't care for the story you told yourself when you placed the trade. It speaks only in price, and when the price tells you you're wrong, you must listen. The men who fail because they cling to ego, because they refuse to face the sting of being wrong. The ones who endure are those who can cut the rope without flinching, even when it burns the hands. In those moments, I learned that capital is flesh and blood. Once it's gone, you don't just lose numbers on a ledger, you lose your ability to fight another day. Protecting it is survival. Every tick against you is the market testing whether you have the strength to walk away, to swallow the loss before it swallows you. It is the hardest act in speculation. Not the bold entry, not the daring addition, but the quiet, disciplined exit when every bone in your body wants to stay. That is the measure of a man in this game. It is there in the silence after you flatten your position that you learn what you're truly made of. Sometimes I would sit with my hands clenched, staring at the flat line on the screen, feeling both the sting of defeat and the strange calm of preservation. And then, with the account intact, with powder dry, I would wait for the next rhythm in the tape, the next signal worth staking my nerve. Money can be made and lost 1,000 times over, but the spirit, once broken, is not so easily rebuilt. I learned that lesson with every hard drawdown, every false hope that lured me into holding too long. Capital is a tool, nothing more. You lose it, and with skill and time, you can earn it again. But let your discipline crack, let your nerve collapse, and you've surrendered the only weapon that truly matters in this business. I've seen men with pockets full of cash crumble at the first hard turn, paralyzed by fear or drunk on greed, unable to act when action was demanded. That's when the market devours them. I recall sitting at my desk, the tape spitting out numbers with a cruel rhythm, each print another cut. The position was bleeding, not fast enough to shock me into action, but slow enough to tempt me into waiting. That's the devil's trick, the quiet grind that eats at your patience, that whispers you're too smart to be wrong. I felt the pride rising, the urge to prove the market mistaken. But the tape doesn't make mistakes, it only tells the truth. And the longer I stared at it, the clearer the truth became. My capital was still there, waiting to be saved. The choice was simple, kill the trade or watch it kill me. Cutting that line was like tearing flesh. The loss hit sharp and ugly, but it was done. I was free. My account lighter, yes, but intact, alive, able to fight again. I leaned back, breathing in the silence, and I knew I had passed the test that ruins most men. For it wasn't money I had saved. It was myself, my discipline, my control. The ability to step back into the pit tomorrow without the weight of despair dragging me down. That is the edge no ticker can measure. When the market finally turned, days later, I saw it. The confirmation was clean, the move undeniable. I stepped back in, not recklessly, not to avenge the loss, but with patience, with care. I built the position piece by piece, adding only as the tape proved me right. The same market that had burned me was now carrying me, And I could ride it because I hadn't let ruin hollow me out. I had preserved the only thing that mattered. The steel inside to cut when cutting was required, to wait when waiting was all there was. Men think it's the size of the account that keeps them in the game. They're wrong. It's the strength to act against your own weakness, to face the pain of being wrong and not let it poison you. Once that's lost, no amount of money can save you. I've seen traders with fortunes freeze like statues, unable to pull the trigger, unable to trust their own judgment, haunted by ghosts of trades they should have cut. Starting over is never about the size of the stake. It's about the size of the man behind it. I've walked into the market with pockets full, and I've walked in with almost nothing, and I can tell you, the capital itself makes no difference. What matters is whether you carry discipline like armor, whether patience sits in your bones, whether you have the courage to place another order after the last one tore you apart. Without those things, a fortune will vanish as quickly as smoke. With them, even a small sum can be the spark that builds a new fire. I remember sitting with a thin account, barely enough to call a stake. Every tick meant something. Every position was life or death. And that kind of pressure can break a man if he isn't steady. But I didn't rush. I didn't fling trades into the tape like a desperate gambler. I waited, studying the rhythm of the market, watching for that one clean moment when the price told me more than the chatter ever could. When it came, I moved, not with reckless size, but with sharp precision. The position was small, but it was right, and the moment it began to work, I felt the old confidence return. Not the wild pride of winning, but the steady knowledge that discipline had bought me another chance. The real capital is control. Patience is the interest it pays, and courage is the risk you must carry to keep it alive. When I added to that trade, I did it carefully, only after the tape confirmed my first move. Each addition was like laying another stone on a foundation. No hurry, no greed, just deliberate steps. That's how a stake grows, not in leaps, but in layers. And if the tape had turned against me, I would have cut it without hesitation. Because saving capital, even a small amount, means saving the game itself. The temptation after loss is always to chase, to claw back what you had, to prove yourself to the market. That path leads straight to ruin. I've seen men double and triple their bets out of anger, as if force could bend the tape to their will. It never works. The market punishes rage. The only way to rebuild is with patience so sharp it feels like a blade pressed against your own throat. You wait, you study, you strike only when the odds whisper in your favor, and you never, ever overstep. It's a strange thing. Once you've lost it all, you stop fearing loss. What you fear instead is losing your own control. And that fear becomes a strength, a guardrail that keeps you from tumbling over the edge again. That's why starting over is never about the money. Money is only the chips on the table. The real game is whether you have the nerve to sit back down after being broken, whether you can steady your hands enough to wait for the tape to show its hand, and whether, when it does, you can pull the trigger without trembling. The surest way to ruin is to chase what's already gone. I've seen men cut down not by a bad market, but by the madness that comes after it. They take a loss, and instead of standing still, they sprint headlong into the next trade, driven by the hunger to win back what was taken. They tell themselves they're fighting, but they're not fighting the market. They're fighting ghosts. The market doesn't care about what you lost yesterday. It doesn't know the size of your wound or the weight in your chest. All it knows is price, and price punishes the man who trades out of anger or revenge. I've lived that lesson. One day the tape turned against me hard. I misjudged, held too long, and the loss was heavy. I felt the fire in my veins, the kind that says you must strike back at once. I scanned the board for anything, any excuse to hit the button, to prove the market wrong, to prove myself right. That's the moment the trap snaps. I've stepped into it before, throwing size at weak setups, trying to wrestle the tape into giving me back what I thought was mine. And each time, the loss only grew, one bad trade compounding into two into three, until the account was bleeding faster than I could breathe. The hardest thing to do after a loss is nothing. To sit there hands still, while your pride howls for action. But the discipline to wait, to let the storm pass, is the difference between a professional and a casualty. I remember flattening my book one day after a rough hit, staring at the quiet screen, the silence almost mocking. My capital was smaller, yes, but it was alive. I told myself the market isn't going anywhere. It will be here tomorrow and the day after, and the day after that. But if I squander what I have now in a fit of rage, I won't be here to meet it. When I finally stepped back in, it was on my terms. The tape gave me the signal I had been waiting for, clean and undeniable. I sized small, tested it, let it breathe. When it moved right, I added, not recklessly, not to make back the loss in one swing, but to build carefully, brick by brick. The trade worked, not because the market owed me, but because I had waited for the right moment instead of forcing one. That is the cruel joke of revenge trading. The more you fight to reclaim what's gone, the further you drift from the discipline that could have earned it back. Every chase is another step into quicksand, each struggle sinking you deeper. The only escape is stillness, patience, the calm eye in the middle of the storm. I've learned to breathe through the silence, to let the tape write its story, to accept that sometimes the most powerful move a trader can make is no move at all. When I've lost and had to begin again, the only way forward has been to return to the fundamentals, as though I were a boy just learning to read the tape. Pride will tell you otherwise. Pride whispers that you've earned the right to swing big, that you've already paid your dues. But the market doesn't care how long you've been around, how much you once held, or how much you've lost. The market wipes the slate clean every morning, and the man who doesn't humble himself to study it anew is already finished. I remember one stretch after a heavy blow where I forced myself to do nothing but watch. I sat for days with my orders untouched, studying the tape until the rhythm came back to me. It felt strange, almost humiliating, to be so cautious after years of bold speculation, but I knew better than to let my ego drive the trades. The patterns revealed themselves slowly. I began to see the hesitation before a turn, the sudden wait behind a move, the signs that separate noise from meaning. And with that recognition came the patience to wait. The first trade back was small, deliberate, almost timid. I tested the waters, not with the hunger to win it all back, but with the focus of a craftsman sharpening a blade. The tape moved in my favor, not dramatically, but enough to confirm the read. I didn't rush to add. I let the market prove itself, one tick at a time, before laying down another stone. That patience, more than the profit itself, was the victory, because it meant I had stripped away the poison of revenge and returned to the discipline that built me in the first place. Every time I've tried to rebuild without that humility, I've failed. Jumping at shadows, forcing trades, chasing rumors, it all ends the same way in deeper loss. But when I've returned to fundamentals, the process is slow, steady, almost dull on the surface, yet it carries the strength of iron. Observing, confirming, acting only when the market speaks clearly, cutting quick when it doesn't. That is the only way to regain your footing. There's a strange peace in it, too. Sitting with no position, no noise in your head, just the tape in front of you. Every hesitation, every burst, every pause tells a story. And if you're quiet enough, you start to hear it again. And when the moment finally comes, when the market aligns and your hand moves almost without thought, it doesn't feel like gambling. It feels like recognition, like meeting an old friend after a long absence. That's why starting over demands humility. Strip away pride, strip away the need to be right, strip away the memory of what you had or lost. Begin again as though you've never placed a trade, because in truth, each trade is the first trade, each position a new test, and the market never forgives the man who forgets he is always a student. The greatest fortune a trader can ever hold is not measured in dollars. It's measured in the grip he keeps over himself when the market bares its teeth. I've seen men with wealth so vast they could move a stock with a single order, yet they lost it all because they couldn't master their own impulses. Fear makes them freeze, greed makes them reckless, pride blinds them. The market doesn't need to beat a man like that. He beats himself before the first bell rings. I've stood at that edge myself, staring at the tape while my chest burned with the urge to act. There's a peculiar madness that comes when a position is running hot. You feel untouchable, as if every tick higher confirms your genius. That's the moment I've made my worst mistakes. Adding too quickly, holding too long, believing the move will never end. The tape always teaches you otherwise. I remember one streak where I let greed take the reins. The trade had doubled, then tripled, and still I wanted more. I ignored the hesitation, the little signs of exhaustion. By the time I acted, half the profit had vanished, and what remained felt like ashes. Self-mastery is not about denying emotion. It's about bending it into discipline. When I rebuilt after losses, I learned to treat each decision as if my survival hung on it. If the tape confirmed me, I added, but small, deliberate, never out of hunger. If it turned against me, I cut with the swiftness of a knife. There's no room for hesitation in that moment. Each second you delay, pride whispering that the market will turn, is another dollar of your stake bleeding away. I forced myself to act coldly even when it tore at me. That coldness became my armor. The hardest test comes not in loss, but in the quiet between trades. You watch the tape drift, and your hands itch to do something, anything, to feel alive again. But the wise man waits. He waits for the rhythm to show itself, for the market to tip its hand. Patience is as much a weapon as any entry or exit, though it feels like standing still in the middle of a storm. I've sat there stone-faced while others jumped in and out, burning themselves to cinders. And when the signal finally came, I was sharp, rested, ready. The truth is, self-mastery is the only fortune the market cannot strip away. Accounts rise and fall, wins turn to losses, losses to wins. But the man who governs himself, who controls his fear when the screen bleeds red and reins in his greed when the numbers soar, that man carries wealth far greater than capital. I've felt it in the calm of closing a trade clean, in the silence after a swift cut, in the steady rhythm of adding to a position only as the tape allows. That's when you know you've won. Not against the market, but against yourself. Failure has a way of cutting a man open, stripping him down to the bone. It's in that raw place, standing in the wreckage of a bad run, that you decide what you'll become. Most men crumble there. They drown in regret, or they chase their losses like a drunk chasing the last bottle. But a few, the rare few, use that pain like iron in the fire. They let it harden them. They take the lesson, bitter as it is, and forge something stronger. I've lived that more than once, and I can tell you, losses don't have to bury you. If you meet them with discipline, they become the very ground you stand on. I remember a trade that went wrong from the start. The tape whispered one thing, but I convinced myself of another. Pride kept me in, blind to the warning signs. By the time I cut it, the loss was deep. I walked out into the night with the numbers still burning in my head, every tick etched like a scar. That kind of defeat makes you want to claw back at once, to hit the market harder, to prove you're not beaten. I've done that before. I've thrown good money after bad, chasing shadows, and each time the market punished me without mercy. But in this moment, I didn't chase. I sat in the silence, licking the wound, letting the pain settle. It felt like swallowing fire, but it was the only cure. The next morning, I returned not with anger, but with patience. I watched the tape without moving, studying every shift, every faint tremor. The loss had stripped away my arrogance, left me sharper, more alert. When the market finally showed its hand, I entered small, careful, deliberate. It wasn't about recovering what I'd lost. It was about proving to myself that I could act with clarity again. The position moved in my favor, and instead of rushing to press, I waited, adding only as the tape confirmed. Each addition was measured, each step deliberate, no greed, no hurry. That trade paid, but more than the money, it gave me back my confidence. The kind that comes not from winning, but from knowing you can take a blow and still stand. That's the strange gift of failure. It teaches you the cost of weakness better than any victory ever could. Every time I've been humbled, I've come back more cautious, more disciplined, more attuned to the rhythm of the market. You don't forget the sting of a loss that gutted you. It sits in your bones, guiding your hand the next time you're tempted to overreach. And when you've faced that fire enough times, you stop fearing it. You know that ruin is always waiting, just one mistake away. But you also know you've survived it before. That knowledge steadies you. It makes you trade not with fear, not with arrogance, but with the calm resolve of a man who has been burned and still returns to the flame. When the market breaks you, it is not the end. It is the test. Money will come and go like the tide, but the man who masters himself will always find a way back to shore. Stand in the ashes without fear. Guard your discipline like gold, hold your patience like a weapon, and carry the courage to begin again. For in the end, the market rewards not the loudest, not the boldest, but the man who cannot be broken, the man who rises after every fall, steady, silent, and ready for the next fight.